Thank you all for being here. First, we have a reception after this reading right out here in the yard. And so please join us. There will be plenty of everything for everybody. I think we've accounted for all tastes in here. I do know a couple of people we might not be able to satisfy, but that's their problem. I'm standing up here just to very briefly welcome Leah Stewart and say a couple of things about her. She was on the staff. She was on the staff for, 10 years? 94 to 2004. She was tireless. She has the most wonderful laugh. The laugh goes with a wonderful mind. She is the author of 6 novels. Her latest one from Putnam is What You Don't Know About Charlie Outlaw. She was the head of creative writing at the University of Cincinnati, and since she did a good job, the way those things go, she was punished up into chair of the English department, which will teach her once and for all. And but she's joining us. She will be here in the summers. Who knows? We might lure her into being here more time than that. Springs, winters, I don't know. We'll work on it. She's got a new office that's being set up, and so the Sewanee Writers Conference, Sewanee Review, will be over across from here, over sort of where the bookstore used to be, over in the main part of the campus. And things will go on famously, as you're going to see when Leah stands up and reads to you. And join me in welcoming Leah Stewart several times over for all she's doing.
Thank you, Wyatt, and thank you for everyone for coming out. I have to say that in all my life, this is the most intimidating place I've ever read. And when I stopped being on staff, I did think, well, at least I never have to give a reading in the Cushman room again. But here I am again. I thought that by way of thanking Wyatt, I would read the very brief introduction that I wrote for the reminiscences that many faculty wrote about Wyatt and the conference, which will be in the next issue of the Sewanee Review, the fall issue of the Sewanee Review. When I first came to the Sewanee Writers Conference in 1995, I was 21, halfway through an MFA program, and so awed by the other writers I could barely bring myself to speak. It amazes me, looking back, that the conference was actually a fairly recent creation, Wyatt Prunty having started it only 6 years before. In Wyatt's own telling, he was a newly arrived faculty member at Sewanee when administrators sought his advice on how best to make use of a legacy from Tennessee Williams left for the purposes of encouraging creative writing and creative writers. The conference was born from that request, and Wyatt moved rapidly from idea to execution, inviting writers like Tim O'Brien and Mona Van Dyne to come teach the very next summer. By the time I joined the staff, the conference already seemed like something that had always existed and always would, a separate world into which I had been lucky enough to find the door. Over the 10 summers I worked there, the other staff members and I referred to the conference as Brigadoon. And presiding over this magical, briefly accessible village, all the more magical because it was brief, was Wyatt, the architect of literary paradise and the man who had brought us all there. Or perhaps I should say had brought us all together because of the centrality of the sense of community that Wyatt created and nurtured over 30 years. For many writers, the conference has been not just a place of literary inspiration or connection, but of confirmation that what we do when we create an image or a plot or a line of dialogue matters. That feeling, which can be fleeting in the rest of life, becomes palpable during the conference in a room packed with people, caught up in the same poem or story or play, suspended in time and space by the particularly acute emotion that only a communal experience can generate. When we support other writers, when we listen to and read and teach them, we make art vital and we make it possible. Wyatt's faith in that principle and in the primary value of language and of thought has been a wellspring. Okay, I'm going to read the first section of my most recent novel, What You Don't Know About Charlie Outlaw. And this has 4 parts, this section. So when I get to part 4, when I say 4, you'll know you only have to listen another 10 minutes or so. I did an enormous amount of research for this novel that included a very deep dive down a very deep rabbit hole into reading books about the craft of acting, because this book is about actors. And as a result, each section begins with a quote from a book about acting. So I'm going to start with that. The actor's instrument is himself. He works with the same emotional areas which he actually uses in real life. The self that the actor presents to the imaginary Juliet is the same as the self he uses in his most private and intimate experiences. The actor is both the artist and the instrument. In other words, the violinist and the violin. Lee Strasberg, A Dream of Passion. 1. Something terrible is about to happen to Charlie Outlaw. This terrible thing will slam into his life with such shocking force as to seem impossible, implausible, even as it's happening. If we could reach into his story and warn him, he'd struggle to believe us. For the last 3 weeks, Charlie has been so miserable that it's hard for him to imagine his life could get worse. Also, he is famous, and people tell him all manner of untrue things. Charlie Outlaw is an actor, currently the male lead of a hit television drama. In his roles, he's had to grieve and rage and die, and yet his own life, or shall we say his life as Charlie, because even when he's someone else, it's all his own, has been blessed with an absence of horror. He has, like all of us, known fear and anxiety and guilt and heartbreak, known them more intensely perhaps than many of us, because he was born with the heightened sensitivity of an actor and because he became one, and so subjected himself to the highs and lows of that existence, the intensity only inconstancy can bring. Heartbreak is what chased him here, to this island nation off the coast of a foreign continent, to this clearing in a rainforest where he sits and eases off his backpack, pretending not to notice the surreptitious glances of the woman beside him. Heartbreak, and also fear and guilt and shame, and a desire to escape the gaze, the many, many gazes, of those who know too much about him and imagine even more. Later, he will relive again and again the sequence of events that brought him to this place and time, starting with the interview he gave Vanity Fair. Without the interview, none of the rest of it would have happened, not the backlash from fans and coworkers, not the stricken look on Josie's face, not the insomnia-driven impulse to book a flight. He wouldn't have spent last night alone in a rental cottage, struggling to resist calling Josie again, would never have hiked into the jungle today without his phone. A person to whom something terrible has happened is as obsessed with causality as any plotter of stories. I did A, and B followed. Is that what it means to deserve something? Right now, Charlie's mind is on the right strap of his backpack, which he's struggling to loosen. His pack is very full because he's planned an overnight hike, 11 miles of walking today, and then a night, maybe 2, spent under the stars on an otherwise inaccessible beach, and then 11 miles back again. There are a handful of other hikers in the clearing, napping, eating, adjusting the laces on their boots, and though he intends no conversation, he's glad to see them. He dislikes solitude, but he has chosen it as penance, as quest. He has to remember he's a person, not a compendium of other people's opinions. He has to remember who he is when he's alone. The woman beside him turns out, when he glances at her, to be quite beautiful. She goes on watching as he fiddles with his strap. There are only 3 reasons to observe him performing this extremely uninteresting task. 1, she knows who he is. 2, she thinks he's attractive. Or 3, she's bored. All of the above is also a possible answer. He tries to resist meeting her gaze, but even now, when he should know better than to make eye contact with strangers, it seems rude or cowardly to ignore someone who's looking at him. She smiles and doesn't look away, not just bored then. He smiles back automatically, then returns to his backpack. Please don't talk to me, he thinks, but he can tell she's going to. For quite some time now, possibly his whole life, a good deal of Charlie's processing power has been devoted to reading other people's reactions. He's highly attuned to the feelings of others, an instinct that can have the eerie accuracy of telepathy. He can usually tell what someone wants from him, and most of the time he tries to provide it. He strives never to offend because he hates to hurt others and because he himself is easily hurt, though jokes and charm and good looks assist him in concealing that. Of course, in trying to please one person, a reporter, for instance, you might offend everyone else. Since the interview, he's been stuck reliving every one of his stupid, thoughtlessly hurtful words, the memory of saying them, the memory of reading them, the memory of everyone else quoting them back. Even if Josie had forgiven him, even if she hadn't broken up with him, he'd be struggling to forgive himself. Why hasn't he learned by now to deflect, to produce an enigmatic smile? Why does he still answer every single question he's asked? He presses his thumb and forefinger hard against his eyelids, takes a breath, shifts his mind back to the strap. American? The woman asks. Because he doesn't want to talk to anyone, he doesn't want to talk to her, lovely though she is, but he can't tamp down his reflexive politeness, his hardwired desire to please. Yes, he says, you? She puts her hand to her chest and says, Brazil. So she won't sense his reluctance to talk. He asks another question. Are you going all the way to the beach? She purses her lips and tilts her head from side to side. Maybe, she offers finally. She waves a hand at her feet. These boots, she makes a face. Ah, he says, boots are important. She smiles as if this were a clever thing to say. The show doesn't air in Brazil, at least he doesn't think it does, but still she might know who he is. With the internet, all things are possible. If she does know, he wonders if she's seen all the nasty comments about him, the homicidal vitriol. Some people probably even hate him in Portuguese. From his pack, he extracts a bag of lychees he bought from a kid with a cooler on the side of the road. He offers some to the woman and they both eat. He makes a joke and she laughs, meeting his eyes with obvious interest. He wishes he could reciprocate. He wishes he wanted to. That would be an approved way for this story to unfold, the story of how he tried to get over Josie. But to sleep with another woman would feel like a betrayal, like another one. You are alone, the woman asks. You hike alone? Yes. You? The woman shakes her head, gesturing at two women stretched out on the ground with their hats over their faces, their booted feet crossed at the ankles. My friends, she rolls her eyes. They are tired already. Me too, Charlie says. I don't really like hiking. No? She raises her eyebrows. Why then? Why don't I like it, or why am I doing it? She laughs, though what was funny? Both. I actually do like hiking, just not by myself. So why? He shrugs, then presents her with a sheepish smile. I'm on a spiritual journey. He can say spiritual journey only if he puts it in quotes. Not because he doesn't mean it, because he means it so much. People mistake irony for disdain, but how? Without irony's blessed distance, could you avoid succumbing to every one of your raw and tearful yearnings, every ridiculous thing you feel? Save it for the close-up, Charlie. That's what he says to himself in life when he can tell he's about to cry. He said it to himself last night, alone in a rental cottage intended for two, and then cried anyway. When did the habit start? Before he was an actor, if there ever was such a time. I understand now, she says. For a spiritual journey, you must be alone. Is that true? I guess that's true. So now I ask another why. Why what? Why did I need one? She nods. Yes, why? Why, Charlie? The reporter had read deeply about acting, interviewed a multitude of actors. She was dangerously insightful. She asked questions about his process, about his ambitions and aesthetics, about the experience of newfound fame, like she already knew the answers, and so it seemed mere confirmation to give them to her. It felt like they had a mutual understanding. Her loyalty is to the magazine, not to you, his publicist said, with a weary patience after the article appeared. Charlie knows that. Of course he knows that. His task was to project the publicist-approved version of Charlie Outlaw, hers to see through that to his messier, more complicated, genuine self. She succeeded by making him fail. Can he blame her when it's his job, too, to generate trust? You can make out a truth out of anything, he said to the reporter during the part of the interview that was an earnest discussion of craft. You just have to make people feel. Still, he hates that these days he gets punished every time he drops his guard. His show's success was nearly instantaneous, and he's had months and months of interviews and events and people who melt into puddles or turn spiky and awful at the sight of him. He wants to stop feeling like every interaction is a chess game, each side anticipating moves. It's exhausting being careful all the time. It makes him sad how frequently now Charlie Outlaw feels like another part he plays. When we think of actors as changeable, manipulative, performative, we forget the willingness to be vulnerable, the crucial impulse toward honesty. Fame insists that vulnerability be armored in wariness, but Charlie has not been famous very long. He resists the lesson. He still wants to be himself. The interview began to go awry when the reporter asked him whether he'd watch his own show if he weren't on it. He answered the question honestly. He gave it serious thought. He said no. What can he tell the Brazilian woman who may already know all this and many other things about him? That it turns out to be possible to know he said what he said about the show being a little boring in its tidy resolutions, a little limited in its will they won't they concerns, and yet feel taken aback to see it all in print. The boring quote was the one that really pissed people off, that and the part about liking more challenging shows. To be a fan is to bear a love that by its very nature separates you from the loved one, a wind pushing away what it wants to hold. All the people who'd been so ready to offer up their love, so insistent he receive it, he could never love them back like they loved him, and they knew it, and so they were just waiting for him to give them a reason to hate him. He released them from their purposeless longing, and frantic with relief, they took to their keyboards to call him names. So he thinks his fans are stupid, people wrote. He thinks he's better than us, but we made him. Ungrateful shithead, he'd be nothing without us. He'd be nothing without that show. He could tell the woman he is afraid that this is true. Plenty of people wrote, I still love him, but alas for human nature, those words floated away while I hate him, I hate him, I hate him settled like shrapnel in his mind. The woman nudges him with her shoulder. I'm in suspense. My girlfriend broke up with me. That's why I'm alone. To say this aloud is a self-inflicted wound. The woman looks at him with such sympathy, which maybe she wouldn't if she'd read the article. I know this feeling. Terrible. She does not love you now? I don't know. He wants to protest that of course she still loves him. She must. It's only been 19 days. He believes in love at first sight, having felt it both on and off the stage. He fell in love with Josie the night they met. But surely the end of love takes more than an instant, more than 19 days. Can an emotion stop so abruptly, like a road cut off by a wall? Not in his experience, not even when the emotion belongs to a character and you walk off the stage as yourself. There is another man? Charlie shakes his head. She points at him in playful accusation. Another woman? No. So he finds an answer that is neither a full confession nor a lie. I said something about her to someone else, and she found out. That makes her wince. What did you say? Why does everyone want to know his secrets, even the ones that are secret no longer? And how did the reporter get him to tell Josie's? He remembers discussing the effects of fame. Sure, that was the theme they kept revisiting. And then the reporter brought up Josie's career, how Josie no longer got anything like the level of attention Charlie was getting now. What did he think that might be doing to her self-worth? Charlie should have said something cheerful and evasive. Instead, he answered haltingly, feeling his way toward the truth. A small, uneasy part of him knew he should shut up, and as if she sensed that, the reporter changed tack. She complimented his relationship with Josie, saying how happy they seemed in photographs, so beautifully real that she wondered if it was all just another act. Once he'd been waiting in the car for Josie while she auditioned, and she emerged buzzing with anger or elation, he couldn't quite tell, and instead of going to lunch like they'd planned, they drove to a deserted part of the garage where she climbed on top of him despite, or perhaps because of, the dangers of security cameras, of some producer's assistant pulling up next to them as she parked her car. It wasn't like Josie to be reckless, to let passion win, and that's why he remembers the scene with such painful vividness, the sound of her breathing and the determined way she moved. He loves that fierce, unconquerable part of her, loves it still more, perhaps, because she so rarely lets it out. Their relationship was the realest thing in Charlie's world, and he told the reporter so. He remembers that part clearly. He said it with confidence. Then the reporter asked, "Is she the love of your life?" And he hesitated. She is, but in the beat after the question, he stopped to wonder what Josie would say if someone asked her that about him. Would she say yes? Lately she'd been a little distant. Would it make her uncomfortable if he said yes? Would he seem annoyingly sappy? They'd had a very uncomfortable conversation after his suggestion that they buy a house together, a conversation he'd done his best to forget. In the reporter's expression, he saw that his hesitation had gone on long enough to seem like a negative answer, and so he said yes, hastily, loudly. Then, uncomfortable with his vehemence, he added in a worried way, "So far." Everything in this description is accurate. The way he said "so far" suggested insecurity, not womanizing arrogance, but he should have used a different phrase like "I hope" or something, anything else, because in print it didn't look the way he'd meant it. Asked if Josie Lamar is the love of his life, he said "so far." 2 words, 5 letters. Josie shouted them back at him more than once. Her fury left him stricken and fumbling. His apologies couldn't unsay it. None of his explanations explained. In all that terrible scene, these were the 2 worst things: the despair in her voice when she said he'd made her look pathetic, and the flat finality with which she asked him to leave. The Brazilian woman nudges him again. "You don't want to tell me what you said. This means it is very bad." "Yes, it's very bad. You said she is ugly. You said you hate her mother." "No," Charlie laughs, "nothing like that." The woman waves a hand. "I won't make you tell me. You said sorry to her?" "Many times. It didn't seem to matter. But it is good for you, she touches his chest with her index finger, "to say what you feel." "I don't know about that. That's what got me into trouble." "Really? I say what I want to say," she laughs. "Maybe this is bad." Charlie gives her a rueful smile. "It's bad when I do it, I guess." "Say something you want to say. What do you want to say right now? To who? To anyone? To your girlfriend? To me?" "Josie, you said I cared too much what other people thought, and then you broke up with me because of what other people think. Josie, you said to leave you alone, so I did. I came all the way here. I let my phone die and stashed it in a drawer. I hiked miles into the jungle. Was all this a terrible mistake? Is there something I could have said or done if I'd stayed, if I'd tried again? Can I fix it? Even now? Do you still want me, Josie? Should I run back up the trail and come home to you?" "You are thinking something," the woman says. "Yes, but you don't say it." He shakes his head. "Ah," she laughs, leaning back on her hands. "We are always ourselves." He appraises her. She cocks her head, gives him a challenging smile. It's easy to guess what she wants from him. The test is whether he'll offer it. He feels a rush of anger at Josie for lecturing him about success in ways that suggested he was wrong to enjoy it, for falling silent when he recounted praise from a famous fan, for disappearing from a party so that he hunted for her for half an hour, calling her phone until one of his co-stars told him she'd left, for refusing to buy a house with him once he started making money, citing her attachment to her own house, the skittishness left over from her long-ago divorce. That was the first time he'd felt doubt, and only because it seemed like she did. During the last year, the world has become a hall of mirrors. Everywhere he looks a different version of himself until even he doesn't know which one is real. But Josie does. Josie knows him. How can she believe the person he is in that article over the one he is with her? "I have an idea," the woman says. "You can go with us instead of alone." "That's nice of you," Charlie says. "But..." The word hangs in the air. Any second now she'll ask, "But what?" What should he say? He can hike to the beach with this woman, maybe spend the night with her there, insist to himself that it really is over with Josie. He can put her off with a joke or maybe sincerity, proceed up the trail alone, continue his penance in solitude. He can grab his backpack without another word and run back the other way, plug in his phone, call Josie, propose. There are other choices too, so many possibilities, and he doesn't know which is right, and he doesn't know where any of them will lead, and so he wishes he didn't have them. The woman shifts her body toward him, about to speak again, but a sudden commotion intrudes. For an instant, before he separates the noise into the rumble of wheels on dirt, voices raised in confusion and alarm, before he turns to see the car and the van, he's grateful for the interruption. Before someone shouts, a strangled, fearful sound, before the doors of both car and van open and 8 people thrust themselves out, before he sees that they have guns, before they point those guns at him and the other people in the clearing, before they force him into the trunk of the car. Later, the memory of that grateful instant will make him feel bitterness, regret, longing most of all for Josie, for the time when he still got to choose. 2. Josie Lamar used to be a hero, and now she isn't. Or, because she remains a hero to the many fans of the cult show on which she starred, it's more precise to say that she no longer feels like one. What she feels like is a half-awake, intermittently employed actress in line at a coffee bean and tea leaf, wearing yoga pants and a hoodie, her long red hair pulled up in a messy ponytail. How often do you have to act to still call yourself an actress? More and more, she's been thinking about quitting so that not working will be her choice, so that she will no longer have to ask herself such questions. Once upon a time, Josie was Bronwyn Kyle, beloved of fangirls and fanboys, a fighter, a chosen one. She punched and she kicked, she suffered and she triumphed. Bronwyn Kyle didn't have it easy. To be a leader takes a toll, and so does the inevitably of the new fight that follows each victory. But still, Bronwyn knew her worth. She knew her power. And so, because Josie was she and she was Josie, Josie knew her worth and power too. Josie knew how it felt to stare down an evildoer, to tell him with her expression, "I will destroy you," and have him turn and run. Josie knew how it felt to matter. Josie tries not to miss being Bronwyn Kyle, but she does miss it. And if she knew what had happened to Charlie, she'd miss it even more. Bronwyn Kyle could rescue Charlie from the people who've taken him. What can Josie do? The man in line in front of Josie wears a concert t-shirt and jeans like a crew member or an off-duty actor, but he's got the serious, clean-shaven face and close-cropped salt and pepper hair of a businessman, so maybe he's visiting from out of town. Maybe he's on vacation. Maybe he slept with someone at a nearby apartment and now he's stopping here before he goes home. Maybe he goes out really early for his coffee and then goes home and puts on his suit. That last scenario seems the least plausible. He glanced at her a moment ago, and she saw in his face the subtle performance of suppressed recognition. If he did recognize her, in a moment he'll glance at her again. People have a hard time repressing that urge. Josie understands that. Sometimes she, too, has to force herself to look away from a famous person, the director of her favorite movie from childhood, the roguish movie star whose poster used to hang on her wall. It's 5:45 a.m. Josie has a 6:30 call time at a studio in the valley. It's on a lot so small she'll have to park a mile away and catch the production shuttle. She should make it in plenty of time, as it's early enough that the 4:05 shouldn't be a problem. She's not a morning person, and 2 decades of early call times have failed to make her one. So what's on her mind right now is how tired she is, and how slowly this line is moving, and how she hopes this guy doesn't talk to her because she's not sure she's awake enough to summon the necessary politeness. Especially if he doesn't know where he recognizes her from and wants help figuring it out. She's not worried about the fact that she's pregnant because she has no idea that she is. She's only 5 weeks along. She's 41 years old. Though theoretically she wanted to have children, in the last few years the panicky indecision induced by her uncertain career and her waning fertility has given way to acceptance. So while children are still biologically possible, they no longer seem so to her. It hasn't yet dawned on her that she missed a period. She's never been regular, even less so since she hit 40. In a remarkable coincidence neither she nor Charlie is yet in a position to appreciate, Josie is playing a kidnap victim this week. Later, when she looks back from the end of this story, connections like this, each link on the chain back to Charlie, will seem to Josie both inevitable and amazing. This is how we come to believe in fate. For now, all she knows is that she's guest starring on a cable procedural, a show that cuts back and forth between victims and the FBI agents out to rescue them. It's called, appropriately, Kidnapped. Josie is not the first recognizable actor to play one of the victims, though some viewers will be sad to see her in the part, shaking their heads at what becomes of us all, and others will feel the weird, nasty triumph we can feel at the sight of a once successful, now diminished stranger, and others will get a thrill out of seeing her and imagine she took the part for fun, not out of need, and still others won't think about her at all except as her character whose name they probably won't recall. They won't recognize her, won't realize she was ever even close to famous. The character's name is Karen Woodward. Josie auditioned for the part and was glad to get it. She needs the money, sure, that's never not the case, but also her friend Cecilia is a regular on the show, and also, most of all, she just wants to work. She always wants to work. You can't be an actor unless someone will let you act. That's why she so often dreams of writing or painting, anything, really, that would give her a creative outlet over which she had some control. So, we all think sometimes about how it sucks to be writers, but I got to tell you, you spend a lot of time talking to actors, and you're like, oh, I'm glad I'm a writer. It is a lot harder to be an actor. Okay, the man glances at her again. He says nothing but turns away with a secretive smile, so she knows he recognizes her. He must have been a fan of Alter Ego. No one who knows her from her other work ever looks quite so delighted. Now he's got his phone out. She can't see the screen, but she imagines he's texting someone, and she's right. He's texting his wife and teenage daughter, both of whom will be thrilled to hear that he saw Josie Lamar and will want to know every detail of the sighting when he gets back to their hotel room. He'll report that she's taller than he might have guessed and really, really skinny, and that she ordered an Americano with an extra shot and room for cream. He'll say she looks great, and they'll look up her age on IMDb, and his wife will admire her for resisting plastic surgery, and his daughter will wonder why she never married again or had children, and they'll remind each other of the famous men she's dated. In response to their jealousy over the encounter, the man will tease them that this is what they get for lazing around in bed while he goes to fetch their coffee. It'll be a moment they reference for years to come, the time Dad saw Josie Lamar and they missed it, and it was so unfair because though Dad loved her show, they were the ones who were the real fans, Mom watching it when it aired and then years later rewatching it with her daughter, Josie's character a role model for them both, a girl so smart and brave that sometimes Mom teared up at the sheer joy of Bronwyn Kyle's existence, at her ability to show this character to her daughter and say, look, there's something out there for you besides hookers and girlfriends. I promise. I promise there is. For Josie, it's not that kind of moment. She won't remember it later, faded into the mass of such encounters. She remembers only the dramatic ones, the linebacker of a man who couldn't stop saying her name as if it were a proclamation while he stood between her and the exit from Bed Bath & Beyond, the woman in a crisp suit who burst into hysterical tears when she saw Josie at the next table in a restaurant eating scrambled eggs, her cousin's girlfriend who slid in beside her in the pew during her grandmother's funeral, so close their thighs touched, and asked in a very audible whisper for her autograph. The girlfriend held out a hymnal with the funeral program atop it, proffered a pen. When Josie made no move to take it, the woman pointed to a blank space on the program underneath a Bible verse, as if the problem were that Josie didn't know where to sign. Now, in the coffee shop, Josie's braced and alert, trying to prep for a scene in which she can't predict the lines. Both cash registers open at the same time, and Josie and the man step to them side by side and place their orders. She's aware of him while pretending not to be, just as he is of her, though she's better at the pretending, having had years of practice. It was hard for her during the time when she was truly famous, not being able to observe people without being observed herself. To be a good actor, one has to notice the particular way the man hiding his anger turns away from his wife, the self-conscious carriage of the teenage girl, newly curvy, who wants to be looked at but can hardly stand it when she is. It's the problem of an anthropologist in the field. You can't observe natural human behavior when your very presence alters it. An anthropologist who wanted to examine how people react to celebrity would find Josie a good interview subject. She's sympathetic to the starstruck, the ones who are nice at any rate, and she's honored and often moved to hear that she impacted someone's life, and yet it's by necessity a distancing sympathy, tinged with caution, the way you might feel about a little noticed acquaintance who abruptly presented you with a love poem. What people want is eye contact, recognition, to register in the consciousness of the person so deeply embedded in theirs. They are eager to touch you, and often they do, your sleeve, your hair, your hand. They ask to take your picture, or they don't ask and take it anyway. They say, "Oh my God, I just really want to hug you." Lost in a desire so compelling, they're helpless not to express it, as if they're children or drunk or on the rapturous verge of speaking in tongues. They've approached transcendence. They're near the source. Their hearts thunder. Their legs shake. They feel the heat coming off your body. You're real. You're real. They were right to believe in everything you've ever made them feel. It was so much worse 20 years ago when she was on TV every week in people's living rooms, and they lacked any sense of separation between their lives and hers. Then when people approached her, they'd attract other people until a crowd had gathered around her, and in those crowds, Josie felt vulnerable, overly exposed, unsafe. Now she doesn't mind, in no small part because these days one fan doesn't usually lead to more. Most of the time she even likes the interaction, exhausting as it is, trying not to end up the butt of a joke on someone's blog, the villain of someone's Twitter feed, trying to be what people want. But today she fears a fan encounter because people have been theorizing in the virtual world about her reaction to Charlie's interview, and therefore someone might have the temerity to ask her about it in the physical one. After a night lost to Twitter and the comments sections of celebrity gossip sites, she forbade herself to look again. He just said the truth, was one opinion. She's washed up. Another, what I don't get is how she ever got hot in the first place. Another, she was great on Alter Ego, but as she ages, she comes off shrill and unlikable. Another, she's too old for him. He's so cute and she's a hag. How is she supposed to forgive him? Charlie did not, of course, say that she was washed up. Charlie didn't say anything like that. But what he said could be interpreted that way. It was fine for him to tell the reporter that he was afraid of coming to rely on fame, that he was afraid of the world becoming his mirror, of growing so used to attention that when it vanished, he'd be bereft. But he shouldn't have said that this was what had happened to Josie. He shouldn't have talked about her struggle, which was not his to expose. He shouldn't have said he thought it was hard for her now to watch fame happening to him. And above all, he shouldn't have said, "so far." At the thought of that phrase, she feels again the rush of shame and grief that has not, in the last 3 weeks, lost any part of its power. Her years as an actress have taught her to be vulnerable at work, guarded otherwise, but for Charlie, she lowered the wall, so when he hurt her, she had no defenses. If she hadn't trusted him so thoroughly, it'd be easier to forgive him now. That article was a repudiation of everything she'd believed their relationship to be. Was he the love of her life? Yes. Yes, he absolutely was. Her certainty is unbearable in the face of his qualified answer. She misses him with a horrible intensity she can't allow herself to call. "Please talk to me," his last text said. Every day for the last 2 weeks, she's picked up the phone to respond, then stopped herself. And in all that time, 14 days, he hasn't tried again. So it really is over. It's over. How can it be over? But it is. She knows that as he grew more famous, she occasionally subjected him to abrupt withdrawals, to glimpses of an anger she refused to acknowledge. Yes, she admits it. And she knows how sorry, how wounded he is. She would have known that even without his saying so because she knows him so well. She's sure he feels as if the whole world has taken up arms against him, with her at the head of the charge. But how could he say such things? How could he fail to predict the consequences? She knows what it is to ride high on adoration, and yet she can't forgive him for succumbing to it so completely he believed it was his to keep. He made a public example of her and at the same time proved that he himself had learned nothing. She resolves, again, not to think about Charlie, which takes an effort so monumental it feels physical and is, she knows, a resolution made particularly ridiculous by the fact that this morning she put on the necklace he gave her. She's wearing it right now, tucked under her shirt. Her longings are contradictory and manifold. The barista calls out, "Chris," and the man in the concert t-shirt retrieves a cardboard tray with 3 cups of the largest size coffee they offer. As he passes Josie on his way to the creamer station, he says in a low voice, "You're terrific." And though she says, "Thank you," relieved, her voice full of genuine pleasure, she's not sure he hears her as he walks away. Some people treat these encounters as though they're spies at a meet, barely looking at her, whispering a compliment as though it were a secret. These are the fans who feel grateful for what she's already given them and want only to give something back, and she feels her own responsive gratitude to them for demanding nothing. The teenage barista calls out Josie and hands over her drink with a disinterest approaching disdain. Josie smiles at her anyway, carrying the warm glow of her secret, believing again for a moment that she is terrific, which is, after all, what we all want to believe. Terrific is the opposite of how she's felt since she lost Charlie. 3. Don't worry, I will stop at 5:15. I may not get through section 4. It's not enough, of course, to perform a convincing emotional response to a situation. A good actor must adapt that response to the overall tone of the piece. On a comedy, even heartbreak is occasion for a joke. On a procedural, even murder cleans up tidily, and if you're playing a relative of the victim, you probably shouldn't cry. Some stories have no room for raw desperation. Charlie has played being trapped in the trunk of a car 3 times, twice on comedies, once on a procedural, and on none of those occasions was he asked to scream or sob or have a full-blown panic attack. On one comedy, the scene was a reference to the famous one in Out of Sight, his character trying to play the charming, take-it-all-in-stride rogue to an eye-rolling girl. On the other, he performed a series of contortions in concert with another actor, struggling to retrieve a phone from that actor's back pocket with his teeth. On the procedural, he shook his head wildly as the bad guy duct-taped his mouth, and then, after the trunk closed and the car started, he looked around in grim and purposeful resolution and began kicking out the taillight. Alone in this trunk, this real-live trunk, in this real-live moment, there is no romantic banter, no comic acrobatics, no heroic display of any kind. It does not occur to him to try to kick out the taillight. It does not occur to him to do anything. He's completely overtaken by panic. He's hyperventilating and sweating, and while he's aware of the movement of the car, it's a dim awareness, afflicted as he is by the tightening vice around his chest against which his heart desperately flings itself. Being forced into a trunk by gun-wielding strangers was terrifying enough to cause these effects, but his claustrophobia intensifies them, his mind telling him over and over that he will die instantly if he spends one more second in this tiny enclosed space. He's been claustrophobic since childhood, for no reason he can recall, though his second oldest sister guiltily thinks it might be because of the time she shut him in the closet for nearly an hour when he was 2. Whatever the cause, he'll bound up 10 flights of stairs to avoid an elevator. He worried when he had to play those trunk scenes that he'd ruin a day's shooting with a panic attack, but his claustrophobia never kicked in, perhaps because he wasn't being himself. Right now, he has no one else to be. He's all he's got. Charlie Outlaw, 34 years old and 6 feet 2 inches tall, quite tall for any man, but especially an actor, too tall to be fetal positioned in the oven-hot trunk of a mid-sized sedan, making himself even hotter with his frantic breathing until at last he loses consciousness. Let's leave him there a moment, poor Charlie, because nothing more will happen to him until the car stops. Charlie has always wanted to be an actor. 3 months ago, when his parents moved from their big suburban house to an apartment in downtown Cincinnati, his mother sent him a box labeled Charlie's Childhood in her almost illegible handwriting. In it, he found a book report on the autobiography of Marlon Brando, written when he was 9, that offered a random assortment of facts about Brando before segueing into a disquisition on his own ambitions. When I grow up, I want to be an actor. I will be a method actor in the style of Marlon Brando, who learned from Stella Adler how to make his emotions seem real. He'd forgotten all about this, and he's not sure now if it was lack of confidence or masculine embarrassment that made him wait so long to audition for a school play, which he did finally as a sophomore in high school, and only then because his girlfriend persuaded him to try out with her. The play was Grease, and he got the part of Kaniki. His girlfriend was cast as an extra and quit the play in anger. She was the star of the school's drama program, but Grease is a musical, and she couldn't sing. Charlie didn't ever say that to her, of course. He listened to her rant about the drama teacher's betrayal with patience and understanding. Partly because of that, she stayed his girlfriend a while longer, swallowing her own hurt feelings to come see him every night he was in the play. Also, she couldn't resist his performance. Even then, he'd been that good. Sitting in the audience, she could feel the way he'd magnetized the air. When his castmates spoke, she heard them say their lines. When Charlie spoke, she believed him. The other girls at school looked at him now with drugged and helpless yearning, but he was only hers. Every night in the auditorium, she felt the power of having what everyone else wanted. Why on earth, at 9, had he been allowed to read the autobiography of Marlon Brando? His father was the exhibitions director at the Contemporary Arts Center, site of the famous Robert Mapplethorpe controversy, and his mother was a First Amendment lawyer. They forbade him violent television, but beyond that, they resisted censorship. If they saw him with a copy of Judy Blume's Forever from his oldest sister's bookshelf, they'd say, "That's not appropriate for you, honey," but they wouldn't actually take it from him. They'd trust him to put it back as if he could be counted on to understand the need to protect his own childish innocence. He usually did put it back, whatever the book was, because he liked being trustworthy. He was number 3 of 4 children, the others all girls, and every one of them a handful except for him. He wasn't just the only boy, he was the only good one. Until the play, he'd shown no evidence of special skill. His sister Caroline was a math whiz, Beth a talented artist, Alexa a 3-sport athlete, but he was the good boy, and oh, how his parents loved him for it. Though his sisters taunted him for those good boy ways, they loved them, and him, too. Everybody loves Charlie Outlaw, or at least they used to. He's counted on that always, without quite understanding how much. He's had an unconscious belief that he arrived first, whole and complete in himself, and the love pursued him. Only since the article has it seemed to him that everybody's love is the foundation on which the rest of him is built. He has big eyes and mobile, expressive features, an easy smile, good manners. Because he is a tall and broad-shouldered man, his inherent sweetness seems a charming discovery rather than a weakness. "You're so nice," people say to him, as though his niceness were a miracle. And when your niceness wins you so much approbation, why wouldn't you continue to display it? In the last year, as his share of the world's attention expanded exponentially, he has been so nice. And he's gotten so much love, so much. The naked adoration in their faces, the outsized gratitude for any minor kindness, so that to have been nothing but polite makes him feel like a god. He's been mainlining love, a dose so strong that the high teeters on the edge of pain. It's terrifying to be worshipped, more terrifying still to imagine being worshipped no longer. For months now, even before the troublemaking article, he's been waking at 4 in the morning in the desperate, sweaty grip of his own inadequacy. The headline on the article was "Charlie Outlaw Takes the Stage," which didn't quite make sense as he's in a TV show, not a play, but the copy editor couldn't resist doing something punny with his name. Few can. Outlaw wears a white hat, Outlaw rides again, etc. A quick internet search and almost every article about him confirms that the name is real, not invented, but people on the street still ask him, sometimes in a tone of sweet wonderment, sometimes in a way that tells him they already know and just want to confide that they're in on the joke. Then he says yes, and they say, "Really?" with varying inflections, and he says yes. They look skeptical or amused or oddly impressed. The skepticism perplexes Charlie. Why would a man who wanted to be taken seriously name himself Outlaw, given the choice of any name in the world? When an actor changes his name, he's not looking to sound like a self-deluded character on a sketch comedy show. He's looking to distinguish himself from some other guy in the Screen Actors Guild. He's looking to sound like a star. Who is he now if people no longer love him? If Josie doesn't? The car is slowing now in the face of some substantial bumps in the road. The jostling rouses Charlie, who would just as soon have not been roused, as at this moment there's no benefit to consciousness. When he slipped into his mind, he found Josie there. Outside it, she's gone. Nothing good about being him. He opens his eyes, then closes them. If only this feeling of unreality signified that none of it was real. They bound his hands in front of him with rope. He tries to loosen it and succeeds only in further chafing his skin. He tries to think, but in his brain there is only a humming silence harmonizing with the vibrations of the car. One clear thought finally surfaces, and it is this: I must be in shock. He is correct in this self-diagnosis for all the good it does him. His pulse is rapid, his pupils dilated, his skin clammy. He feels like he might throw up. As the car continues to slow and then finally stops, he concentrates on vanquishing his nausea. All will be well as long as he does not vomit. For comfort, distraction, resolution, he pictures Josie's face. Charlie and Josie first met as Benedict and Beatrice at the home of an actor who liked to gather groups for readings of Shakespeare plays. Charlie tagged along with a friend who'd been invited because he knew that Josie would be there. When he was a kid, he watched her show with his sisters, and he had a crush on her character, which of course he understood at the time as having a crush on Josie. By the time they met, he was sophisticated enough to know that he shouldn't conflate her and her character, but that didn't mean he wasn't curious to see how much she'd resemble Bronwyn, that he wasn't watching for signs of that. His friend had told him that she was surprisingly good at Shakespeare, given her lack of formal training or experience on the stage. You don't even know if she knows what she's saying, but she makes you feel it, he said. Then Charlie walked into a room and saw her, and despite himself, he was disappointed. She seemed too diffident, too quiet. As soon as they started to read the play, though, he knew that his friend had been wrong. She knew exactly what she was saying. He had a sense that her intelligence was always being underestimated, that she underestimated it herself. But what power she had in her. When she wasn't acting, she dimmed it, or the world did. Their relationship progressed very quickly in that way that makes you feel like your love is inevitable, irresistible, while everyone around you suggests that you might be moving too fast. For 2 years, they never fought, which was, in retrospect, a mistake, because when they finally arrived at conflict, they had no practice in recovering from it. Even so, for 2 years, they were a fantasy, a miracle. They drove everybody else crazy. Please, Josie, he thinks in the trunk. Please, Josie, please. What is he asking her for? To come for him and transport him back to that time. On the other side of the world, in Charlie's home state of Ohio, a teenage girl in the grip of boredom and longing enters Charlie Outlaw into Google. He comes up smiling, smoldering, angry, sad, determined. So many faces, image after image, as she clicks through looking for the version that most swells her heart. And there it is, the one that will shortly grace the home screen of her laptop, a shot a magazine chose from dozens, his gaze frank, his smile inviting. She sighs. I still love you, Charlie, she says. The trunk opens. The air and light rush in. Charlie Outlaw opens his eyes. Thank you.